Today, July 30th, it's World Day Against Human Trafficking. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery. It takes three forms: sexual exploitation, forced labor, or human organs trafficking. In Canada, it predominantly takes form under sexual exploitation and forced labor. Human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation represents over 80% of known cases. It mainly targets women and girls, with over 90% of cases reported. However, let's not forget that this also happens to our men and boys. Indigenous women and girls are disproportionately targeted by this heinous crime. Although they represent only about 4% of the population, they represent more than 50% of sexual exploitation cases reported. The average age is between 12 and 14. This heinous crime is happening right here at home in our own backyard. It is a big misconception to think it only happens in some faraway land, like perhaps the country I was born to, Venezuela, or places like Brazil and Colombia, or Thailand and Cambodia. These women are trafficked right here in Canada, over 90% of them being Canadian citizens. They are trafficked from places like Halifax, Nova Scotia, to Grande Prairie, Alberta, or from Montreal, Quebec, to Toronto or Niagara Falls, Ontario. Highway 401 is known for being a big corridor for human traffickers. These could be your daughters, neighbors, or a friend. It is a hidden crisis that is growing as the demand grows, and there's been little law enforcement. Statistics don't do justice to the reality of this despicable crime. Many survivors never come forward. They feel shame, judged, and some often take time to gather strength and understand what truly happened to them. Human traffickers coerce and manipulate their victims into sex trade. Some of these survivors feel shame as they think it was their choice to do this, or that they put themselves in that situation. But as you peel off the layers of complexity, they realize they never chose this. No little girl wakes up one day saying her dream is to sell her body, especially as the sex industry is becoming more and more violent. Some argue that it is the oldest profession in the world, but it's not. Farming is. Sex work is not actual work. It is the oldest form of oppression, if anything. That's why I was proud to work on Bill C-36, the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, known as PCEPA, back in 2014 under the Harper government. My direct connection to this file began then. I was a parliamentary affairs advisor to the then leader of the Senate, Senator Claude Carignan. My job, among other things, was to follow legislation pertaining to the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, from its introduction to the Senate chamber to royal assent. But this legislation felt differently to me. I decided to closely follow it from its inception and introduction in the House of Commons to royal assent in the Senate. I spent all of my summer and fall of 2014 following its every move and carefully listening to all testimonies. It is by hearing the stories of these strong women shared that I felt deep sense of gravity and depth of the realities of human trafficking right here at home in Canada. On September 10, 2022, my husband, Pierre Poilievre, became the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And with that new role came a bigger sense of responsibility. He asked me to introduce him that day to our nation. That is perhaps how some of you got to know who I am. it gave me a little platform. And so I vowed to use it with purpose. I thought of survivors and testimonies I heard. One of them in particular, 8 years exactly to the date, September 10, 2014. I heard the testimony of Bridget Perrier, an Indigenous survivor who was sexually exploited and trafficked from a very young age. Her story stayed with me. Their stories stayed with me. Their voices must be heard because their stories matter. That is why, with this video, I am announcing that I am launching an initiative to bring their stories to light because their stories matter. In the last months, I have interviewed several survivors who willingly shared their stories. I asked them to share their stories in their own words, under their own terms, with the focus strictly on them. These women are absolutely strong survivors that have overcome so much, yet they're so full of life. Some are now grandmothers, like Bridget Perrier. Others are mothers, community leaders, recent graduates, competitive bodybuilders. They have so much strength and resilience, but they have not forgotten what happened to them. How can you? And they have never stopped caring for one another and for what this heinous crime could do to others. That is why they care about sharing their stories. I ask anyone participating in this conversation via different platforms where I will be sharing these stories to please be respectful of these wonderful survivors. I also hope it will have an impact on you and that you will share their story to bring awareness to the hidden crisis of human trafficking. Their stories shouldn't go unheard. Their stories matter.